We walk through the city the way we walk through nature, but are surrounded by an environment that has been molded to accommodate us. We navigate streets through canyons of artificial stone and look up, dwarfed by the walls that have been built around us. It's surprising how little we notice. We live our lives surrounded by a manufactured world, but take little interest in how it looks or how it feels. In the middle of the 20th century, there was a movement that revolutionized the shape of our environment. It had been developing for decades, but in the aftermath of World War II, it finally found a voice in America. It was called modern architecture, and it redefined space, how we lived in it, how we worked in it, and how it expressed itself to the world. This is a documentary about mid-century modern architecture. This is a story about looking up and noticing the details of the canyon walls. Architecture is the cornerstone of our built environment, and it affects all of us. How we live, how we feel, our relationships, our dreams, and our memories.
What is architecture? Architecture is the stage set for our lives. Architecture is where we live, architecture is where we work, architecture is where we hope we express our personality and our values. Architecture in the public realm is how we set the spirit of an age, how we make tangible in bricks and mortar or steel and glass, as the case may be, what our aspirations are.
Architecture is probably the only art form that's functional. You use it every day. You have to. It's shelter. It's it's where you work. It's where you live. But it's sculptural.
In school, with first year, with beginning architecture students, we talk about it mostly in terms of space making, space defining, how one experiences space, how light falls within a space. What the materials are that define a space, what the forms are that define a space.
What is architecture? Yeah, the study of the form, and how it relates to the human, and it's well-being, and it's not just about putting up walls and calling it a building.
Mid-century modern architecture is a term used to describe a trend in American architecture that started in the mid-1930s and lasted into the late 1960s. Mid-century modern architecture was sleek and sexy. It was flat roofs and sloped roofs. It was glass towers, steel frames, and concrete columns. Mid-century modern architecture was the manifestation of the future with no thoughts of the past. It was optimistic, it was a lifestyle, it was technology. It was how people lived in America when the sky was the limit. But in order to understand mid-century modern architecture, you first have to understand that the evolution of modern design started with a transformation in building materials in the late 19th century, notably structural steel, reinforced concrete, and glass. The only thing needed at this point was a new attitude that would release designers from the traditions of the past and inspire them to look for a new way of thinking. Doing just that was the Bauhaus in Germany.
But yeah, we were evangelists, really, when you get right down to it, for modern architecture.
The first test of this revolution in popular culture came in the 1920s in the form of art moderne, which also embraced simplicity of design, no ornamentation, and flat roofs. Often confused with Art Deco, Art Moderne lacks the intricate, historicized, and geometrical ornamentation that identifies Art Deco. This is Art Deco, and this is Art Deco. But this is Art Moderne, with its curvilinear walls that emphasize the streamlined wind tunnel aspect that helped define the style. And there are these buildings. The Hotel Mountainair was built circa 1947 to meet the growing needs of America's automobile culture as travelers drove between Little Rock, Hot Springs, and Dallas. In the late 60s, the hotel was converted into apartments and later a nursing home, but has been vacant since the mid-90s. The current owner of the hotel is aware of its unique architectural qualities and is optimistic the buildings will find their place in the future of Hot Springs. Until then, they sit empty, an architectural relic that speaks to another time.
Hotel Mountainair is most assuredly unique in Arkansas architecture of the 20th century, and it occupies a very special place. It's a transitional building. Dare we say it's got 1 foot in the past, but it's about to make a leap to the present. On the one hand, it's built of a traditional material. It has the solidity of its masonry brick walls. It's got the closure and the comfort of tight, traditional spaces, arguably appropriate to its function as a hotel. But it has moments in the way it turns a corner, in the way that its balconies pop out, the design elements with which those balconies are articulated, and overall, the smoothness, the clarity, the simplicity of its walls when seen as an ensemble. Those latter facets begin to speak to a burgeoning modernism. But it's not burdened with the gloss or the chill of steel and glass that we so often associate with a higher style of modernism, a more up-to-the-moment 50s modernism.
In architecture, it's sometimes difficult to pin movements down to specific times. While Art Moderne was introduced in the mid-1920s, the Hotel Mountainair wasn't built until the late 40s. In the 20s and 30s, architects were just beginning to explore the revolutionary ideas of the international style. If you look through a book on modern architecture, it's easy to find images of buildings that look out of place for the times in which they were built. There's the Steiner House by architect Adolf Loos, the Lovell House in Los Angeles by Richard Neutra, the German Pavilion in Barcelona by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and the Villa Savoy by Le Corbusier. None of these buildings seem to fit the world as it existed at the time. Even more remarkable are these drawings. Sketched on photographs are designs for buildings completely anachronistic to their surroundings. Conventional understanding suggests glass and steel buildings were products of the post-war era, but they were being conceived more than 20 years earlier. This is the work of Mies van der Rohe, a German architect who immigrated to the United States in the late 1930s and exerted a profound influence on how modern design took shape in America. Warren Seagraves is one such architect who was influenced by Mies.
Mid-century design was such a total shift, I think, from anything that came before, that it's not always easy to get. It's not always appreciated. I think anytime you're dealing with issues of the recent past, it takes time to kind of get this perspective on the importance of that time period or that event. And I think mid-century modern buildings are kind of in that gap of being old but not really old. And really, I think mid-century modern architecture is kind of it was such a departure from anything that came before. It's kind of the missing link between the way we built before and the way we build now.
As people in the middle of the 20th century were busy looking forward, there was no place for the past. It was during this period that many important examples of traditional, Victorian, and neoclassical architecture of the previous century were destroyed. Old hotels, office buildings, and schools were torn down to make way for the new. These buildings looked dated and old, and a lack of understanding or appreciation prevented their survival. As we reach further into the 21st century, architecture of the recent past is facing a similar fate. Buildings constructed during the mid-century modern movement are now 50 years old or older, yet their forward-thinking design makes them difficult to view as historic. Modern architecture started as a revolt against tradition and evolved into a movement that grasped for the future. It was the celebration of function over form that reveled in the possibilities of concrete, glass, and steel. It was about experimentation and variation. It was about clean lines and open spaces. Mid-century modern architecture was a part of the post-war culture that had such a defining effect on America. Even though tastes and styles change over time, modern architecture continues to be a source of inspiration for architects today.
You know, it's kind of hip to look at the 50s in terms of architecture. Again, stuff that when I was in school, we turned up our nose at. It was awful stuff. You know, we didn't dare consider a lot of that 50s stuff. We're in a period where it's being reappreciated, reappraised.
Mid-century modern had a lot of attributes that the international style, the old styles didn't have. And it was actually a springboard, I think, toward what we have now.
Today, as a practicing architect, I sometimes research the mid-century modern, go back to that, because particularly with housing designs, because you see that some of our clients still want this open space. And it's just going back to that mid-century when it was being further developed, what that open space meant.
The architecture of today is turning back to modernism. Really, the Axiom Tower in the River Market, if you look at it and the way that it's organized, there's a very linear positioning of the building east-west. There's more solid on the west and east, similar to what the tower building had as well. The cleanness of the front of the building has a reflection of the tower building. The top of the building, the way that it insets at the top with the columns expressed, very reminiscent of this style of architecture. So it's about building on the past, taking the best of these styles and taking it a step further, is what our generation is trying to do.
Most of us will never walk the halls of the Lever House or attend an exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art. But probably we will walk the halls of a local office building, stand in the foyer of a bank, or look for a book at a public library. We all live in a world of built objects, and how they affect us is as important to the human experience as that of the natural world. Take time to look at the canyon walls. Appreciate the details. Notice the lines. Experience the environment in which you live.